Hey guys, before we begin tonight's story, do me a little favor. Drop a comment below and tell me what time is it where you are right now. Which city, which room, are the lights off? I read all your stories before bed. And maybe tonight someone reading the comments will find comfort, knowing they're not the only one awake. Leave a small light in the comments, a heart, a word, or just the time. Now, dim the lights, let your breath slow, let the phone rest gently beside you, and together, let's return to a forgotten time. A quiet room, a flickering candle, a memory not yours, but one that somehow remembers you. This is boring history for sleep, where the world slows down, and even the past forgets to rush. Tonight's episode is called Why Egyptian Bakers Were Buried with Their Ovens. Yes, we'll explore the lives of ancient and medieval bakers, the strange traditions surrounding food and the afterlife, and the quiet revolutions that happened not on battlefields, but in kitchens, kilns, and crumb-covered corners of forgotten cities. So close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift back to the world of warm bread, quiet rituals, and the ovens people took with them into the afterlife. In a dry courtyard pressed between two dusty alleyways of New Kingdom Thebes, the morning began not with the rising of the sun, but with the kindling of fire. You can almost hear it, the brittle whisper of palm fronds snapping, the low cough of a clay oven breathing heat. The year was somewhere around 1300 BCE, and the Nile was steady. You are a baker, but not just any baker. Your oven is a permanent fixture in your afterlife plans. As you gather the flour, sifted stone-ground barley, and emmer wheat, mixed with pulverized dates, you can already smell yesterday's leavening fermenting in a ceramic pot. This is not an exciting life. It is repetitive, methodical, and devout. Bakers in this period weren't just making bread for people. They were preparing offerings for gods and pharaohs. Each loaf carried spiritual weight, just as much as it filled a belly. Most mornings began before dawn in silence, not because of serenity, but because the work was loud, stone querns grinding, wooden paddles scraping, feet stomping in shallow fermentation pits. It was more industrial than one might assume. Large-scale bakery production often served the nearby mortuary temples. There, workers like you supplied hundreds of loaves for offerings that lined altars by the dozen. You were part of a system that believed bread was a bridge to the afterlife. What you made would be consumed by both man and God. It wasn't a solitary profession either. A typical bakery had teams, flour pounders, water mixers, mold handlers, fire maintainers. You all worked under the supervision of an overseer, likely someone connected to the temple estate. Daily quotas were strict, so was quality. A bad loaf was not just an insult to taste, but potentially a spiritual failure, and though you rarely saw the priests or nobles who received your product, your name might one day be inscribed on a tomb wall. Pasherem Per, master of bread for the gods. But even if your name didn't survive history, your oven might. Archaeologists at Deir el-Medina and other workmen's villages have found sunken conical ovens, shaped like inverted flower pots. Thick-walled red clay, always tilted to one side, perhaps to protect against wind. These ovens weren't portable, they were fixed, personal, and sacred. In some tombs, they appear painted or modelled in clay. Proof that for a baker, the tools of your trade followed you into the afterlife. It raises the question, why? Why would anyone be buried with an oven? Perhaps it was symbolic, your eternal task to serve the gods, even in death. Or maybe practical. In the afterlife, hunger was still real. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains spells to summon loaves of bread, jars of beer, even roasts of ox. Provisioning yourself after death wasn't optional, it was essential. The world beyond was seen as a mirror of this one. Better to arrive with your own kitchen. You pause, looking at the handful of dough you've shaped. A small triangle loaf, known from tomb painting. Its smell, once baked, will be smoky, faintly sweet, and slightly sour. You don't use yeast. Instead, old dough and desert air do the work. The oven glows. A small iron tool, likely bronze in your era, is used to retrieve the blackened clay pan. You know exactly how long it needs to bake by feel, not by time. There are no clocks, only shadow and scent. Your hands are cracked, your nails full of flour, but there's pride in the rhythm. And the rhythm is ancient. Bread molds from this period come in various shapes. Animal figures, divine symbols, flat discs with raised edges. Some were offerings, others were ceremonial, many were practical. Every day you prepared between 300 and 400 loaves, depending on the season and demand. During festival periods, output doubled. Your home is modest. Mud brick walls, a flat rooftop, perhaps 2 rooms, one for storage, one for sleeping. The bakery may be part of the estate complex, or in your own courtyard. If you are lucky, your family helps. If not, you hire others. Some are relatives of laborers, who build tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This morning, like every morning, the air smells of smoke, sweat and grain. But today is different, because today the potter who lives nearby is sculpting a clay model of your oven. Not for sale, for your tomb. The thought lingers. Do you believe it will work? Will this tiny sculpture of a furnace, no larger than a goat's skull, really bake bread in the field of reeds? And if so, will you still rise before dawn? You are kneeling now, in a side chamber of a tomb, not yet sealed. The air is cooler here, still touched by the breath of the living. It smells like damp plaster, charred resin, and something older than fire. The painted walls glisten faintly in the torchlight, capturing your attention with scenes you've helped enact, but never before seen from this angle. A row of loaves, triangular, conical, flat, and dome-shaped, sits neatly beside a wooden statue of the deceased. These are not real. They are painted wood, sculpted clay, or sometimes carved from limestone. They will never mold or grow stale. They are offerings, yes, but more than that, they are stand-ins, replicas of something sacred, eternal. In life, the daily offering rituals in Egypt's temples were elaborate. Priests in pristine linens would bathe, purify themselves, and approach the statue of a god with food prepared by temple workers like you. These were not casual meals, they were divine transactions. The gods received sustenance, the people received protection. But what of the dead? In the elaborate cosmology of ancient Egypt, the afterlife wasn't a realm of angels and silence. It was a continuation of daily life, fields to plow, tasks to complete, relationships to navigate, and food. Food remained central. That's why tombs were stocked with it, not just real food, but artful representations of it. Hundreds of them. And among these, bread held a place of honor. You remember the spells, chapter 38 of the Book of the Dead. Spell for not dying again in the realm of the dead, and chapter 74. Spell for providing bread and beer in the realm of the dead. These texts weren't metaphors, they were tools, functional incantations to secure sustenance in the land beyond. Inscriptions on tombs often include offering formulas. 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, 1,000 of cattle. The numbers were symbolic, but the intent was serious. The deceased required provisioning daily, and so just as a noble might be buried with their chariot or cosmetics, you, a humble baker, might be buried with your oven. In fact, the ovens themselves have shown up in tomb scenes, often accompanied by baskets of flour, pitchers of water, and women kneading dough. These weren't decorative motifs. They were insurance policies. Assurance that you wouldn't go hungry when your body no longer woke at dawn. Imagine this, a small chapel outside your tomb, where your son or nephew offers a fresh loaf each festival day. He whispers your name aloud, so you are not forgotten. He pours beer into a dish and lays the bread beside it. Maybe he doesn't believe it feeds you, but maybe he hopes it does, because remembering keeps the world together. At Deo Medina, the village of artisans who built royal tombs, archaeologists have found evidence of real bread sealed into burials, burnt loaves, wrapped loaves, wrapped loaves, even loaves shaped like animals or deities. It wasn't superstition, it was security. If the world beyond mirrored this one, then surely it had ovens, hunger, and the need for comfort. Some loaves were embedded with amulets, others were dyed with ochre or scented with herbs. A few were inscribed with the names of the gods, offered not just to feed the dead, but to earn favor. Bread also appears in funerary art, in an odd way. It is rarely shown being eaten in the afterlife. Instead, it is shown being offered, given, shared. It wasn't just nourishment, it was ritual, generosity, and structure. In the tomb of Rechmiah, a vizier under Thutmose III, there is a famous painting of a bakery scene. Women grind grain, shape loaves, stoke ovens. Children carry baskets. Nothing glamorous, but eternal. That was the message. Even the ordinary could become sacred if painted on the walls of the dead. And yet there's a practical reason too. Egyptian belief systems were never purely mystical. They were pragmatic. Food decomposed, insects invaded, tombs were raided, representations were insurance. If the real bread was stolen or spoiled, the images would remain. If the statue was broken, the spell might still work. This is why some bakers, simple artisans, have tombs at all. Consider the tomb of Amenhotep, a middle-class baker during the late Middle Kingdom. His grave goods included not gold, but miniature baking tools, a clay oven model, and a stela showing him delivering bread to the gods. He was not rich, but he was essential. In many cases, professions defined how one was remembered. A soldier was buried with weapons, a scribe with pallet, a weaver with spindles. For you it is an oven, not because it was your job, but because it was your gift to the divine. Today you help arrange the final offering table of a former overseer. It is your last duty before the tomb is sealed. You feel the warmth of the clay model oven against your palm before placing it beside his feet. You wonder when your own time comes, will your family remember the rituals? Will your oven be buried with you? Or will you stand in the field of reeds, barefoot, hand open, waiting for a loaf that never comes? You stand now not in Thebes, but in a modern excavation trench. The year is no longer 1300 BCE, but rather 1923, or 1999, or 2021. The sun still beats down over Egypt, and the sand still clings to everything. Only now, the hands brushing dust from clay are gloved, and the prayers muttered under breath are scientific, not sacred. Here is where the baker's afterlife begins again. Archaeologists have long puzzled over the near-obsessive inclusion of bread in ancient Egyptian burial sites. At first it seemed symbolic. Then, as dig after dig yielded not just representations but real, carbonized loaves, some intact, some crumbled to grit, some neatly sealed in stone vessels, the understanding deepened. This wasn't metaphor, this was logistics, a plan, a hope. At Saqqara, in tombs dated to the Old Kingdom, archaeologists discovered loaves over 4,000 years old, baked hard as rock, blackened from time and ritual fire. They retained their form oval, with a faint ridge down the center, like a soft boat hull. Analysis found traces of emmer wheat and barley. Some had bits of date fiber, a few contained the unmistakable crunch of sand, proof that ancient milling was far from perfect. But those imperfections tell a story too. Bread wasn't just a priestly offering or a noble feast. It was daily sustenance. Workers who built the pyramids at Giza were issued ration slips that included loaves and beer. Their pay came in part in carbs. Without bread, no tombs. Without bread, no gods appeased. And without bakers, no bread. In Deir el-Balas, clay baking molds were uncovered by the hundreds, some cracked from use, others carefully discarded. The molds were standardized in size, a sign of organized production. Some even bore fingerprints. That is how you live now, not in name, but in touch. Elsewhere in Thebes, archaeologists found an entire bakery complex. Clay ovens sunken into the earth, circular troughs for mixing, and grinding stones lined neatly along a back wall. No plaque, no inscription, just soot stains and flour dust, fossilized into eternity. Forensic studies of skeletons from working-class cemeteries in ancient Egypt reveal enamel wear, jaw strain, and malnutrition, proof that even the bakers and those who consumed their bread suffered from the very thing that sustained them. The stone grit in the flour eroded teeth over decades. Bread fed, but it also wounded. Still, bread persisted. In wall paintings, funerary texts, and miniature models, it holds a central place, even in King Tutankhamun's tomb. Amidst gold and incense and leopard skin sandals were loaves of bread deliberately placed, carefully preserved. And in the late 20th century, when scholars attempted to recreate Egyptian bread using ancient techniques, they made a discovery. The taste, while sour and coarse, was oddly satisfying. Deeper, earthy, like something fundamental. They used only emmer wheat fermented dough and date syrup baked in clay pots. The loaves came out dense, heavy, but soft in the middle. Nothing like today's airy white slices, more like compact sustenance, something to keep you alive in the land of the dead. This modern experiment echoes something timeless. We don't just want to study the past, we want to taste it, to feel it, to know what it meant to hold bread in your hands, and believe, truly believe, that it could nourish your soul, not just your body. The question of why bakers were buried with their ovens then becomes not a mystery, but a mirror. Imagine your entire life, built around the flame of one hearth. You know its mood, its crackles, its temperament. You know when to feed it, when to let it die. It is not a tool, it is a companion. So when your time comes, and your body is wrapped in linen and sealed in darkness, wouldn't you want that companion beside you? Modern Egyptologists now refer to ancient bread in strangely intimate terms: heirloaf, ritual sustenance, sacred cup. But to the men and women who made it daily in narrow courtyards, there were no labels, only purpose. You might wonder if the gods ever noticed, if the thousands of loaves baked and offered ever reached some divine mouth, or if they simply turned to dust while the priests turned away. But maybe the gods weren't the only audience. Maybe the real miracle wasn't divine consumption, but human continuity, because every loaf baked, offered, buried and remembered kept the cycle of belief alive. Every model oven left in a tomb said, "My work mattered," not because it was extraordinary, but because it was repeated, sustained, preserved. And now, 3,000 years later, someone whispers your name in a documentary, or reads it aloud from a tomb wall, or studies the faint flour residue from a clay mold and says, "This was a baker." And maybe that's enough. You're sitting on cold stone, not the marble of a palace, but the polished limestone of a communal latrina, an ancient Roman public bathroom. It's a strange place to begin a story, and yet, as you listen to the faint trickle of water and the occasional echo of a sandal against tile, you realize you're in the very heart of something remarkable. A system, a solution, a society. The year is 98 CE, and you are in Ostia, the bustling port city of Rome. Ships groan in the harbour, crates of grain, oil, wine, and perfume are offloaded onto carts. Sailors shout. Slaves unload amphorae. But here in this quiet, shadowed chamber just off the forum, dozens of Romans have gathered, cheek to cheek, robe to robe, not for ceremony, but necessity. Because you all have to go. Roman public toilets. Latrini weren't private. In fact, privacy was an alien concept to Roman sanitation. The latrina was a shared space, lined on three sides with holes cut into long stone benches. Underneath, a continuous water channel runs, taking away waste. A second, narrower channel runs in front, for rinsing sponges on sticks, the tessoria used in place of toilet paper. There is no door, no partitions, and no shame. Senators, merchants, and servants all squat here in relative equality. You may nod to someone you know, a friend perhaps, or a rival. There is idle chatter, jokes, business deals, even debates. It may sound crude, but for the Romans the latrina wasn't disgusting. It was practical, civilized, even advanced. At a time when much of the world still defecated in pits or open fields, Rome built a network of public sanitation that rivaled even its aqueducts in complexity. You look down at the mosaic floor, small blue tiles arranged in a wave pattern, decorative, but also functional, easy to clean. The walls are painted with geometric red and black frescoes. On one side a stylized dolphin, on the other a rather cheeky depiction of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, lifting her robe. Latrines like these weren't rare. They were everywhere, in markets, forums, bathhouses, military camps. The Emperor Vespasian, father of the Colosseum, even taxed public urinals. When his son Titus complained, Vespasian reportedly held up a coin and asked, "Does it smell?" You shift slightly on the stone seat. It's not comfortable, but it's better than crouching in an alley. Above you, the roof slants open to let in sunlight. A faint breeze carries the scent of wet clay, herbs and something earthy. Not sewage exactly, more like the smell of a city that has learned to manage its filth. That's the genius. Roman toilets were connected to a larger network, the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's first sewage systems, a massive underground canal that drained waste from homes, baths and latrines into the Tiber River. It wasn't perfect. Flooding occurred. Diseases still spread, but it was leagues ahead of anything the world had known before. In fact, it was vital to Roman survival, because in cities like Rome, Ostia and Antioch, densely packed, teeming with life, filth was death. Waste in the street meant cholera, dysentery, parasites. The latrina, for all its bluntness, was a barrier between health and plague, and that barrier had to be maintained. Teams of foricurry latrine workers cleaned the systems regularly. They removed clogs, dredged sludge, refilled sponge basins, and ensured the water channels flowed. It was dangerous work, but essential. These men were rarely honored, but their absence would have meant disaster. Some toilets even had graffiti. Yes, even here, scratched into the stone, you find phrases like Cacatar cave malum, Pupa beware of evil. Here, Fortuna is blind, and holds her nose, crude perhaps, but full of personality, and proof that this was a lived space, not just a utility. You reach for a sponge on a stick, it sits in a basin of vinegar water, disinfecting of course. You wonder how many hands have touched it before you, probably thousands, but no one thinks too much about that. Hygiene was communal, responsibility was shared. You rise, adjust your tunic, step back into the sunlight of the forend. As the bustle resumes, the shouting merchants, the flapping awnings, the call of distant gulls, you realize something strange, that toilet may have saved more Roman lives than all the legions combined, not because it was glorious, but because it was there, boring, reliable, engineered. And because when the empire began to crumble, when aqueducts broke and maintenance stopped, disease returned, cities emptied, life expectancy dropped, the glory faded. But the latrina, humble, smelly, overlooked, had done its due. You are deep underground now, not in a temple, not in a catacomb, but in the guts of the Roman city, the living underworld of drains, runoff, and shadow. A channel of dark, slow-moving water creeps past your ankles. It smells of limestone, damp rot, and something sour. Above, a narrow shaft of daylight filters down through the grated floor of a latrina. You hear the muffled clatter of sandals, a sneeze, a splash. This is where the real work happens. And you are one of the foricari, the cleaners of Rome. No statues are carved for you, no monuments inscribed, but without you, the empire might have choked on its own waste. The foricari formed a low-ranking but indispensable class of municipal workers, tasked with maintaining the city's sanitation systems. You cleaned latrines, you swept the street gutters, you descended into the cloaca maxima with nothing but a bucket, a torch, and a strong stomach. Some days it was rats, other days it was worse. And yet, here you are, scraping hardened deposits from a tunnel wall with a bronze-bladed shovel. Your tunic is damp, your sandals soaked through. Above you, society goes about its business, oblivious. But they would notice you soon enough if you stopped. Roman sewers, like the famous Cloaca Maxima, weren't just ditches, they were vaulted stone corridors, some high enough to walk through. Water from fountains, baths, households, and latrines all flowed into this vast network. Gravity pulled it all outward, toward the Tiber, and you ensured it kept moving. The tools of your trade were simple: a hooked rod, a bucket, a hand rake, and sometimes a tallow lamp strapped to your chest. The dangers were many: collapses, gas pockets, disease. Once your friend Gaius slipped in the dark and broke his arm on the stone edge. It took a month to heal. No compensation, no mention. There is a bitter joke among your colleagues. The emperor may be divine, but he still needs a sponge. The phrase echoes in your head as you wade forward, inspecting a blockage. Somewhere, the flow has slowed. Maybe animal bones, maybe an old oil flask, or worse, a child's toy washed in during a flood. You prod the muck with your rod, and the channel shudders, then begins to move again. You've done your part. The system breathes again. But it's not just the cloaca, you also clean the latrinae themselves. Every few days, you and 2 others walk the circuit. You empty the sponge basins. You scrub the bench holes with vinegar and pumice. You patch any cracked tiles. You keep a tally for the overseer. How many users per day? How much vinegar used? Whether fresh reeds or cloths are needed. Your name is never recorded, but your silence, your absence, would be catastrophic. In military camps, especially along the northern frontiers, your job becomes even more essential. Legionaries are packed into tight, cold spaces. Disease can sweep through a barracks in days. So every cohort maintains latrines, dug with precision, facing away from the wind, supplied with running water when possible, and you stationed with them. Ensure those trenches remain clear. Even emperors understood your value. Vespasian, whose urinal tax stirred much debate, justified the fee with a simple phrase: pecunia nonuth, money does not stink. He was right. The revenue from Roman sanitation helped fund aqueduct repairs and roadwork. The latrines paid for the empire's polish. In Ostia, graffiti found in public toilets praise the gods of cleanliness. To Fortuna and Stercolinus. One reads, Stercolinus, a lesser deity of manure and waste. The Romans had gods for everything, and in a way that included you. You've seen things. In one clogged drain, a small statue of Mercury. In another, dozens of olive pits, and chicken bones, evidence of feasting above. Sometimes you find coins, small ones, clogged in the grime. You keep them. Once beneath a bathhouse you found a ring, gold with a faded inscription, for Claudia, from father. You left it where it lay. Some things weren't meant to be touched. You've learned to read the waste of Rome. Too many fish bones. A feast the night before, surge in hair clumps. A busy day at the public baths, dried urine in the corners. Someone was in a hurry, or drunk. This knowledge, the unseen rhythms of the city, belongs only to you and your kind. You finish your shift by rinsing your arms in vinegar water. Your tunic is stiff with salt. Your knees ache, but as you climb the stone stairs toward the light, the sounds of the forum swell around you, and no one looks twice. You are part of the invisible machinery, necessary, ignored, effective. The empire prides itself on order, discipline, and cleanliness. But beneath that facade there is a simple truth. No victory march, no senator's speech, no philosopher's treatise ever mattered more to public health than the quiet work done in the drains. And you're already walking to the next latrina, because the sponge basins need refilling. You return, centuries later, to the same stone bench, but now it's silent. The basin is dry. The sponge is gone. Dust curls where water once flowed. You are sitting in the ruins of a Roman latrina sometime in the 6th century CE. The empire is fractured. The marble has cracked, the drains are clogged. And the city is quiet in ways it was never meant to be. What happened? The collapse of the Roman Empire is told through invasions and assassinations, through burning cities and failing armies. But beneath those loud events, something slower, quieter, and arguably more devastating was unfolding. Cleanliness died. The aqueducts, those brilliant arches that carried water from mountain springs into Rome, stopped flowing. Some were blocked by invaders, others crumbled from neglect. Their upkeep had required skilled labor, tax revenue, and political coordination, 3 things the late empire sorely lacked. And with water gone, the latrines dried up. Without water, the Cloaca Maxima became a tomb. Waste no longer flowed. It festered. Public latrines, no longer cleaned or maintained, filled with filth. Sponges were left to rot. Basins cracked. Tile floors turned green with moss. People stopped coming. At first they improvised buckets, chamber pots, fields, alleyways. Then disease returned. Urban life in the Roman world had always walked a fine line between brilliance and biological disaster. The infrastructure that once held that balance, daily cleaning crews, functioning drains, fresh water, disintegrated. By the early medieval period, many cities had shrunk to a fraction of their former size. In some, entire neighborhoods were abandoned, streets filled with mud and refuse. Constantinople, still functioning as the Eastern Roman capital, attempts were made to maintain hygiene systems, but even there, outbreaks of plague and waste-related illness became regular. In places like Gaul and Britannia, once full of public baths and latrines, Roman sanitation simply vanished. Wooden huts replaced stone benches. Waste returned to the soil. Rivers once sacred were now polluted. And the memory of what had been was slowly erased. You might wonder, did people forget? Did they not care? The truth is, many cared deeply. Letters from bishops and local officials during the decline mentioned the loss of clean water, the dangers of open waste, and the disappearance of skilled laborers who once maintained it all. But without central funding, without unity, the system could not be saved. Even emperors grew helpless. They issued edicts, often symbolic, demanding repairs, urging cities to resume maintenance. But the legions were busy with border wars. The treasury was empty. The trained engineers were gone. What had once been a triumph of daily ritual Cleaning a sponge, flushing a latrina, was now seen as a luxury. And here's the irony, the very thing that made Roman cities so successful, density, connectivity, centralized services, now made them vulnerable. When the system worked, a city of 1 million thrived, but without sanitation, that same city became a petri dish. In Rome itself, the great public latrines eventually turned into storage spaces, stables, or were looted for stone. Tourists visiting the ruins today often walk past them without noticing. Just another row of carved benches, quiet, empty. But you know the truth. Those benches once held philosophers and fishmongers, senators and sailors. They were places of laughter, gossip, negotiation and necessity. They were part of a vast invisible infrastructure that let an empire survive plagues, grow cities, and feed its millions. When the toilets stopped working, the cities did too. It wasn't just sanitation that crumbled. It was everything connected to it: trade, trust, system, the daily rituals that made life livable. Even centuries later, in medieval Europe, people would marvel at the ruins of Roman aqueducts and latrines and wonder, how did they manage it? Some believed magic was involved. Others said the Romans had powers lost to time. But it wasn't magic, it was maintenance. Skilled, repetitive, often boring maintenance. That's the lesson. Civilization isn't built only by glory or war. It's built in the drains, in the silence of an early morning sponge wash, in the grunt of a laborer hauling slow, in the smooth curve of a stone bench, carved not for comfort, but for cleanliness. So next time you flush a toilet, remember, you're continuing a line of thought that began 2,000 years ago when someone said, let's not do this in the street anymore. It's a Sunday morning in 14th century Bohemia. You are a woman standing barefoot on cold, rush-covered floorboards. The light outside is grey, filtered through mist and wood smoke. The bells haven't yet rung, but already you feel the weight of expectation. You must go to church. And so, you dress, but not just for modesty, not just for warmth. You are dressing to survive. Your chemise is pulled over your head, linen, rough woven, patched from years of use. Next comes your kirtle, dyed a modest madder red, though faded now from sun and scrubbing. You tie it snug, lace up the sides, and cover your hair with a folded linen coif. You move carefully, slowly, because this is the part that matters most. You reach into a small sack hanging near the hearth and pull out 3 cloves of garlic. They're small, wrinkled, strong-smelling, not fresh from the garden, but dried over months, strung by twine and smoke-cured near the chimney. Their scent is sharp, acrid, earthy, unmissable. You crush one lightly in your palm, then 1 clove goes in each shoe, pressed flat beneath the wool-stuffed insole. The third, you tuck into a linen pouch hanging between your breasts, tied with black thread, not for fashion, for protection. This is no culinary choice. You are not seasoning your feet. You are warding off illness, demons, and the envious eye of neighbors. Garlic, in medieval Europe, was not food first. It was medicine. It was magic. And most of all, it was armor. Your grandmother taught you the ritual. She said garlic confused evil spirits, that the devil hated its smell, that fairies and wandering ghosts, drawn to churches during early mass, could not cross the threshold if garlic was near. Others said garlic protected the womb, that a jealous woman's stare could make you barren or worse, miscarry. The garlic in your shoes, a silent amulet, a statement to the unseen. Not today. You are not alone in this. Many women in your village do the same. Some wear iron keys beneath their skirts. Others paint protective symbols with egg yolk on their sleeves. One woman even carries a dried frog's foot. The church condemns most of it, of course. Father John calls it peasant foolishness, warns that trust must be in Christ alone. But even he, it's whispered, wears a carved walnut under his vestments. Just in case, as you step into your worn shoes, you feel the garlic squish slightly beneath your heel. It stings your nose, but it makes you feel safer. Safer from what? The list is long. The plague has passed through recently. Not violently, but near enough that families kept their doors shut for days. A strange coughing illness took 2 children. Some say it was a punishment. Others just one from the east. Then there's old Martinek, a widower, silent, watches women with glassy eyes. No one accuses him, but no one walks past his home at dusk either. Best to wear garlic, especially when the path to church winds past his orchard. Garlic is affordable too. It grows well in poor soil. It dries easily, a poor woman's talisman. You don't have silver, you don't own beads or relics. But you have this, a few cloves, and centuries of belief behind them. It's not only women. Midwives place garlic near birthing stools. Farmers hang it in barns to ward off rot. During storms, families throw crushed cloves into the fire to scare off lightning and spirits of the wind. There's a recipe written down in Old Latin, unguentum contra daemonum sufflationum, ointment against the breath of demons. It contains garlic, goose fat, and ground iron, meant to be rubbed behind the ears before funerals. Even the monks admit quietly that garlic has virtue. One old herbal text in the monastery speaks of it as a purifier of blood, a cleanser of humours, a protector against the air made foul by night spirits. You don't read Latin, but you trust your feet. The garlic stays in. You open the door. Cold air rushes in. The path to the church is muddy, lined with slush and thawing manure. You begin walking, your soles pressing into the cloves. Crunch, squish, step. Your breath is visible. The bells begin to toll. You walk past the orchard. You walk past the stream. And as the stone tower of the church comes into view, you whisper, not to any god but to the garlic itself, "Keep me hidden, keep me whole." You arrive at the church and step inside. The shift is instant, from frost-bitten morning to smoky stillness. The air is thick with beeswax and incense. Candles flicker against damp stone. You take your place on the women's side, folding your hands, adjusting your coif. The garlic in your shoes flattens further as you kneel. No one speaks, but everyone smells it. Garlic, not overwhelming, just there, a faint tang beneath wool and wood smoke. You are not the only one wearing it today. To outsiders, it would seem absurd, pagan, but to the women gathered here, it is simple logic. Your bodies, they have been told, are open, porous, unstable. Medieval medicine said so. So did sermons. So did your mother. From the moment you began to bleed each month, you were taught that your body was a vessel at risk. The humoral theory, the dominant medical model of the Middle Ages, declared that women were cold and wet by nature. Men were warm and dry. This imbalance made women more susceptible to illness, emotion, and possession. Garlic, with its fiery bite, was considered a counterbalance. It was warm, it was pungent. It expelled. It kept your damp, cold, lunar body safe from invisible forces. Bad air, demons, envy. The Latin term was miasma, the idea that disease travelled on foul-smelling air, and so garlic became a fumigant. Worn, burnt, steeped in wine, Monks chewed it during outbreaks. Midwives placed crushed cloves beneath beds. But women needed it most, because if something was wrong in the village, a failed crop, a stillborn lamb, a fever that clung too long, the finger pointed toward you. Not a man, not the priest, you, the woman who wore her scarf too low, or sang while grinding grain, or miscarried 3 times. Garlic could not erase suspicion, but it could repel it. Many women carried other protections: sprigs of rue, iron needles, dried rose hips. But garlic was the most common, cheap, accessible. You could grow it yourself. You remember the herbal your cousin stole from a convent library. It had no title, just illustrations, page after page of plants, drawn in fading ink. One showed a woman kneeling with garlic tied to her ankle. The caption read, "Against the gaze of the harmful eye, let the root of fire be bound, where steps begin." The gaze was no minor threat. The evil eye, a curse brought on by envy or hatred, was feared across Europe. Women were said to be its most frequent targets, especially pregnant ones, especially beautiful ones, especially poor ones. Today, as you sit on the hard pew, your fingers resting against a wooden prayer board, rubbed smooth by years of silent desperation, you know exactly what you fear. It's not just demons, it's being seen, too brightly, too boldly, with too much color in your cheeks, or too much luck in your marriage. That kind of visibility was dangerous. So you mask it with smell. Garlic signals to the invisible world. This woman is guarded. Her body is not an open door, and the church, for all its sermons against old women's magic, understands the fear. The priest sprinkles holy water in every direction. A baby wails. A woman coughs. You glance up at the crucifix, wooden, chipped, wrapped in a linen sash for Lent. The Christ figure leans to one side, as if weary of watching. After Mass you will walk home slowly. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will avoid eye contact with women who gossip and men who live. You will untie your pouch of garlic when you reach the threshold and place it beneath the hearth. But for now, you kneel, and you are not alone. Every woman here has her reasons. Some lost children, some fear fever, some just want to be left in peace. You press your foot down into your shoe, feel the faint give of the clove. Let its warmth rise through the cold floor, up your spine. Let it tell the world, seen and unseen, this body is not yours to enter. Years pass. The garlic you once wore to church is now absent from your daughter's wardrobe. She ties her hair with silk ribbon, not linen. She wears wooden clogs scrubbed clean with lye and lime. Her home smells of vinegar soap and boiled laundry, not fire, herbs and smoke. When she walks to the chapel, her shoes are empty. The world has changed. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly over the course of 2 centuries, something slipped away. A shift in belief, in practice, in fear, and in smell. Garlic, once worn beneath skirts and stitched into shoes, became something else. A cooking ingredient, a medicinal tincture, eventually a nuisance, a joke. But how? The answer lies in the quiet, creeping arrival of modernity, specifically the birth of public hygiene and scientific medicine. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the old ideas of miasma, bad air carrying disease, still lingered, but they began to compete with new ones. Microscope lenses brought the unseen into sight. Doctors now spoke of animalcules, invisible creatures that entered through water and food, not evil spirits or the jealous glance of neighbors. Hospitals, once shunned as places of death, were being cleaned, disinfected, rationalized, and the body, no longer a porous shell caught between the stars and the humors, It became a machine, something to be regulated, observed, and diagnosed. Faith in holy relics and herbal bundles gave way to trust in soap, boiled linens, and isolation. The garlic in your shoe became, at best, an old woman's tale, at worst, a mark of ignorance. And so daughters stopped wearing it. Midwives replaced it with alcohol swabs and iron clamps. Priests stopped mentioning it from the pulpit, except as a cautionary relic of folk superstition. But something else was lost too. Garlic wasn't just a plant. It was a belief system, a quiet spell, a signal to others that you knew the world was dangerous and you were not walking through it naked. Its disappearance marked the end of an era in which women protected themselves with the tools they had, not because they were witches, or fools, or dirty, but because they were vulnerable, and no one else would do it for them. The modern age promised safety through science, but not always comfort. A bar of soap cannot listen to your fears. A boiled sheet cannot keep away a bad dream. A vaccination, though miraculous, does not carry the warmth of a clove of garlic pressed gently into the hollow of a shoe. And the strange thing is, garlic worked in its own way. It had antimicrobial properties. It repelled lice. It kept the blood warm. It masked body odor. It protected the psyche, reinforced confidence. It marked boundaries in a world where women had few. Now, centuries later, you walk through a city street, perhaps Prague, perhaps Paris, and pass a restaurant where garlic sizzles in butter. It is celebrated now, in food, in festivals, in jokes, but it no longer guards your feet. Only rarely do you see it tied above a door in the countryside. Only sometimes do you hear of an old aunt who still crushes garlic during storms. The knowledge lingers, but quietly, like the scent of something once powerful, now tame. Still, late at night when the world feels unstable again, when disease returns, or war hums in the headlines, or your body aches with unknown worry, somewhere deep in you, a memory stirs of cloves, of quiet ritual, of a woman stepping into cold shoes, whispering not to be seen, and you wonder, was she foolish, or did she know something we've forgotten? You wake with your eyes stinging, not from tears, but from the soot suspended in the air. It's dawn, but there is no sunlight here, just faint, shifting greyness. You blink, cough, and roll from your straw mattress. The rushes on the floor are damp, the ceiling beams blackened with years of smoke. Welcome to York, England, sometime around 1320. And welcome to a home with no chimney. The hearth glows faintly at the centre of the room. A low circle of stone with ash and coals still warm from last night's fire. A cast iron pot hangs above it, soot-caked, suspended from a hook nailed into a roof beam. The smoke from the coals has nowhere to go but sideways and up into your eyes, your hair, your lungs. There is no flue, no chimney pot, no vent. The smoke simply rises, pools beneath the thatch, and seeps out through cracks in the shingles. If you're lucky, you stretch, wipe your eyes, and pull a cloak over your tunic. There's soot on the blanket. There's soot on the window frame. Even the dried onions hanging from the rafters are smoked like meat. And yet, this is normal. In many parts of medieval Europe, chimneys were rare, not just rare, illegal in certain towns. In places like York, Bristol, and parts of Flanders, early 14th century laws actually forbade private chimneys on common dwellings, not because they didn't work, but because they did. Chimneys concentrated smoke and funneled it upward in a stream, visible from the street, traceable to a household, and that created problems. Because in a crowded city, smoke meant suspicion. If your home sent up smoke too often, Neighbors might accuse you of wasting fuel or hoarding it. Worse, it might mean you were baking or brewing without a license. In many towns, only communal ovens were allowed. Private hearths raised fears of fire, fraud, and even sorcery. So instead, the law insisted, keep your hearth in the center, let the smoke fill the room, let it seep through the thatch, let it smother you if it must. But do not make it visible. You rub your nose. It's blackened at the rim. As you begin to prepare a thin barley porridge, you stir with one hand and fan the smoke with the other. A child coughs in the corner. A chicken flaps its wings and sends a wave of soot into the air. There is a strange comfort in it, though. Smoke preserves your beams. It drives off lice and beetles. It dries the walls, wards off mold. The eye-watering air inside your home is your own small climate, dampened by winter, choked in summer, always alive with the smell of fire. You've heard of chimneys, of course. Some noble houses have them. In castles, in monasteries, tall, carved, sometimes with decorative pots. But those homes have stone walls and paid fire watchers. You have neither. A neighbor once tried it, built a crude flue from cob and timber. It smoked too well. A bailiff saw the column of smoke and fined him 6pence. The flue was torn down, his ceiling darkened once again. So you make do. Some tricks help. You hang wet cloth near the rafters to catch the smoke. You open the front door during cooking hours. You burn elder branches, less pungent. You don't cook after dusk, when light from flames could be mistaken for heresy or worse. Today, you're cautious. It's Ember Week, a religious fasting period, and although your meal is simple, you still glance outside before kindling the fire fully. No one must think you're baking. The communal oven is locked today, and so the fire stays low, the smoke stays in, the home stays dim. Your lungs ache, your children squint. You stir the pot again, and as the haze curls around the beams like a second roof, you wonder what would it be like to live in a house with clear air. Would it feel empty? Would it feel less like home? It's market day, and as you step out of your home, eyes watering, cloak dusted with soot, you join a slow-moving stream of neighbors trudging toward the square. Around you, homes huddle low and tight, their walls a patchwork of daub and timber, their roofs thatched, sagging, browned with age. Not one sends up a plume. The city of York is alive with sound. Pigs squeal, vendors shout, church bells toll the hour. But above all, the air remains still. There is no smoke curling above rooftops, no chimney stacks breaking the skyline. It's by design, because in this place and time, smoke was not just an irritant. It was a signal, a flare of suspicion, an unspoken announcement that someone might be doing something they shouldn't. Chimneys made that suspicion visible. That's why the city forbade them. For centuries, most homes shared access to public or communal hearths, especially for baking, brewing and drying grain. In towns like Bristol, Coventry and York, these communal ovens were regulated by the guilds and the city watch. Firewood was expensive, and fuel theft was common. On-water-raised fires weren't just dangerous, they were criminal. So the logic went, no chimney, no traceable fire, no traceable fire, no illegal baking. City records from 1316 list fines imposed for unsanctioned ovens, unsmoked malt, and even suspicious vapours. In one case, a widow in York was accused of burning rushes in a back room during Lent to dry herbs for a neighbour. The smoke escaped through a makeshift flue. A watchman saw it. She was fined a full day's labour and made to remove the vent. And yet, as you walk toward the square, you see subtle signs of resistance. A small grate nailed to a wall, with char along the edges, a thatch roof patched with newer straw near the ridge, just wide enough to let smoke rise unseen. A scent of baking bread where no fire should be. People they always do. In medieval towns where walls narrowed streets and buildings leaned like old men toward one another, surveillance was not new. But chimneys made it harder to hide. The presence of visible smoke invited questions. What was being cooked? Was it on a feast day? Was the baker licensed? Was it fish or meat? Was it legal? So chimney building became a class distinction. The wealthy nobles, monks, master craftsmen could build them. They had property, brick, and power. Their chimneys were tall, grand, crowned with carved pots. They were allowed to produce smoke. Because theirs was respectable smoke. Yours was not. And so you learn to work beneath the law. You cook in the morning, when fog still hangs over the rooftops. You bank your fire with damp moss to muffle the burn. You teach your children not to throw bones or feathers on the coals. It makes the smoke too dark. The punishment wasn't always harsh, but it was public. A knocked down chimney, a day in the stocks, a fine too large for your purse. Worse, gossip. And in a world where reputation was everything, gossip could unravel a life. You recall the old woman from Coppergate, Mad Greta, they called her. She'd built a chimney, tall and proud, claimed it was for drying wet wool. The guild thought otherwise. One day it was gone. Next, her roof collapsed from water damage. She vanished soon after. Some said she fled to the countryside. Others said the smoke brought more than fines. Because smoke had another association: witchcraft. Unusual smoke, strange smells, unnatural fires. These things stirred talk, and talk turned to fear. A woman who cooked by night, who dried herbs alone, whose chimney breathed black threads into the dusk sky, she might find herself whispered about in ways far more dangerous than fines. That's why you keep your fire small, because in a world where the visible could be criminal, a puff of smoke might say too much. You step into the square. Vendors sell fish, bread, onions and smoked eels. Ironically, the city is filled with the scent of fire, but it is controlled fire, permitted fire, fires that serve the community, not the individual. You buy a single leek, a small pouch of salt, a twist of stale rye, and when you return home, ducking once more beneath the blackened beams, you bend over the hearth, rekindle the coals, and let the smoke rise slowly, silent, out the cracks, through the thatch. Not a soul must see it. You're older now. The soot in your lungs has settled into a cough that never quite goes away. The beams of your home are darker than ever. You've swept the hearth thousands of times, stirred 1,000 pots, and lived through 3 mayors, 2 plagues, and one particularly. But something is different in the neighborhood this year. It isn't the weather. It's the sky. More and more often, as you leave your home in the morning and look up past the sloping roofs of York, you see thin grey columns rising steadily from a few houses, smoke not drifting sideways through thatch, but lifting cleanly, quietly, straight into the sky. Chimneys, real ones, legal ones. At first, it's just the house of a cloth merchant, then the apothecary, then the notary who lives near the church gate. Their chimneys are narrow, brick-built, freshly mortared. They do not collapse in the rain. They do not need to be hidden, and no one tears them down. The laws are changing. It began slowly, a city ordinance, relaxing chimney restrictions, only for households paying a half tax. Then another decree, allowing chimney construction on stone dwellings with tiled roofs. Fire risk, they said, was lower for the wealthier homes. Then finally, the 16th century dawns, and chimneys are not only allowed, they are encouraged. Suddenly, not having a chimney makes you poor, and that changes everything. You remember when chimneys were criminal, when smoke meant trouble, but now, Smoke has become aspirational. Visitors remark on it. The city is cleaner, they say. The air indoors less choking. Physicians publish tracts on the dangers of smoke-filled rooms. Midwives praise chimneys for improving infant health. Even priests note that Sunday Mass smells less like roast meat. Builders now specialize in chimney work. There are new guild apprenticeships for flue design and soot cleaning. Some chimneys even have double flues, one for smoke, one for cooking heat. An entire world of upward architecture is emerging, and with it, something else: privacy. In the old way, a fire was shared. The hearth stood in the middle of the home. Everything revolved around it. Meals, conversations, illness, death. Now fires retreat to side walls, kitchen fires, bedroom braziers. The family no longer gathers around one center. They spread. Each space has its own heat, its own function. The home is dividing. Your granddaughter, barely 10, dreams of living in a house with a proper chimney. She speaks of rooms with painted walls and air you can see through. She says she wants her hair to smell like rose soap, not smoke. You smile, but there's a silence beneath it. You've lived a life wrapped in hearth haze. You aren't sure what to make of a house that breathes upward instead of inward. You attend a festival that year. The town crier announces new fire safety ordinances. For the first time, a tax is issued per chimney rather than per hearth. You laugh once. A chimney got you fined. Now it's taxed like land. The poor begin to build small chimneys. Crude at first, often leaking smoke, but they adapt as laws relax. Even modest homes begin to reshape. Blackened thatch gives way to tiled roofs. Hearths shift to corners. Ceilings rise. Windows open wider. You visit a cousin's home in the next town. She shows you her clean room, a parlor with a carved wooden mantelpiece and sootless wall. She boils wine over a grate built into a recessed brick chamber. The smoke disappears as if swallowed, and for a moment, you understand. It is better. Your cough eases in the clear air. Your eyes stop watering. The walls do not drip with damp. And when you sleep, your blanket does not carry the smell of fire. Still, that night, you dream of the old hearth, the one that filled your house with shadow and warmth, the one that made every breath sharp, the one around which your entire life once circled. By the time you pass, chimneys are everywhere. Builders no longer ask if you want one, only how many. The city skyline now bristles with brick towers like fingers reaching skyward, as if the houses themselves have grown a spine, and no one finds the smoke anymore. They admire it, because now it means status, comfort, sanitation, wealth. No one remembers that it once meant suspicion. But if someone were to ask you gently what you miss about the old days, you might say everything settled in those rooms. Ashes, stories, secrets. The smoke held it all, and we breathed it in. You open the wooden shutters just wide enough to let in the soft Lent light. The morning is pale, dusted with frost. The street below is hushed. No market wagons yet. No singing apprentices. A stillness hangs over the town. A kind of held breath. It's Lent, after all. A season of silence, denial, and unadorned living. And so you rise and begin your day differently. Not with powder, not with lye soap, and certainly not with the small bronze mirror you usually keep on the table beside the basin, because the mirrors are gone, not broken, not covered. 3 days ago, the parish steward and his men walked door to door, gathering them into canvas sacks. On order of the council, they said. Until Easter Sunday, the council had voted unanimously. No mirrors, no polished metal, no bowls of water left uncovered. Not for vanity, not for punishment, but for penance. You are expected to go 40 days without seeing your own reflection. It is 14/2 of 24, and you live in a tidy stone house in the town of Tielt, in the Flemish lowlands. Here Lent is taken seriously. Not just the food, but the senses. No meat, no music, no colors too bright, no skin too clean, and now, no faces in glass. It's a strange feeling. You dress with care, as you always do, but you second-guess every detail. Did you part your hair correctly? Is your veil crooked? You press your lips together but can't tell whether your mouth is clean. A smudge of soot might still linger from stoking the fire. You think you wiped it, but you can't know. This is the point. The mirror, once a tool of reassurance, has become an indulgence. The priest says Lent is for reflection of the soul, not the surface. That vanity is a fog between you and God. That to see yourself too clearly is to forget the hunger of Christ. You understand, in a way, but that doesn't stop the unease. How much of yourself is tied to your own image? Your neighbor's daughter, a seamstress's apprentice, has taken to asking others how she looks. Is my wimple slipping? Is my nose still red? Do I look tired? You watch her searching other people's eyes as though trying to glimpse herself in their faces. You've stopped asking. It's easier that way. There are practical consequences too. A boil on the cheek goes unnoticed. A loose thread dangles from your sleeve all day. A bit of flour on your chin remains until dusk. And yet, something else happens. You begin to forget what you look like. It starts slowly. You feel less aware of the tilt of your chin, less obsessed with the shadow beneath your eyes. You stop smoothing your skirt every 5 minutes. You speak more boldly, not pausing to imagine how your mouth moves when you do. You forget to tug at your veil before walking past the blacksmith shop. You begin to move more like yourself. Your husband, for his part, says little. He too has lost his mirror, though his was small brass, used mostly for trimming the hair around his ears. He now trims by feel. The result is uneven. You don't mention it. The town has changed. At market, there is less color, less chatter, fewer glances sideways into polished shop windows. The glass makers have covered their displays. The wig maker has removed his silver dish. The apothecary has draped black cloth over the tin basin on his counter. No one complains, not aloud. But you notice the men looking longer at women's hands now, not their faces. The women glance down when passing windows. Even children seem subdued, as if aware they are less visible somehow, not just to others but to themselves. Today the priest delivers a sermon about inward seeing. He says Lent is not just about abstaining from meat and drink. It is about detaching from the self that always seeks attention. He says when the eye turns away from its own likeness, it begins to see the suffering of others. You sit in the back pew and wonder if that's true. Is it? Have you become kinder this week? Quieter? More focused? Or just a little more lost? You leave church unsure. At home you pour water into a cup and catch your breath for a moment. The surface ripples. For the briefest second you think you see a flash of your eye, a cheekbone, a glimmer of someone you used to recognize. Then it fades. You empty the cup and return to your day, unreflecting. It's the third Sunday of Lent. The streets are quieter than usual. Rain has fallen all morning, turning the square to brown soup. Church bells echo across tiled rooftops, and inside the cathedral, the priest's voice rises above the drip-drip from the eaves. His sermon today is about mirrors, or rather, about what they reveal. He quotes the Apostle Paul, "For now we see through a glass darkly." Then he closes the Bible and begins to pace slowly beneath the pulpit's canopy. Vanity, he says, has found a home in every polished cup, in every pool of still water, in every piece of glass that teaches a woman to admire her own mouth more than she worships the Lord's. The congregation is still. You sit near the back, veil damp from the walk, listening with a kind of wary calm. You've heard this tone before. The voice not of logic, but of fear wrapped in certainty. In truth, no one knows exactly why the mirror ban began this year. Some say it was the bishop's idea, disturbed by an altar girl who smoothed her fringe in the bronze door hinges before Mass. Others say it was the midwife's apprentice, accused of vanity after a silver comb was found in her apron. Still others whisper it was just the steward's way of proving authority. But beneath it all is a deeper current, the fear of the female face, not just as beauty but as power, as temptation, as distraction. The Church teaches that Lent is a time of restraint, but it often speaks louder about the need for women's restraint in particular. Your voice, your body, your presence, all must be muted. And the mirror. The mirror was a threat because it allowed you to see yourself clearly, to assess, to alter, to perform. A woman in control of her appearance, they feared, was a woman in control of her effect. And so they made the act of looking dangerous. Scholars, mostly men, wrote treatises on the sin of reflection. They said mirrors invited demons, that Satan hid in polished metal, whispering lies to the one who gazed too long, that Narcissus drowned for his vanity, that Lilith adorned herself with jewels and was cast out of Eden. Even the Church's own images reinforced this. In illustrated margins, women holding mirrors were often drawn with devil tails. A woman with a comb and mirror, a shorthand for lust, for pride. Never mind that monks used polished obsidian to trim their beards, that nobles stared into silver bowls to study their wrinkles. The mirror was not evil in itself, it was dangerous when it looked back at the wrong person. You remember the look on your neighbor's face last week, when her daughter asked quietly, "Was I pretty before Lent?" There was a long silence. Then the mother said, "That is not a question for now. But isn't it? Isn't that the quiet panic simmering under this mirror ban? The question of beauty, of identity, of control. If a woman cannot look at herself, can she still know herself? And if she forgets her face, does she forget something more? You recall your own mirror, now bundled in a sack in the church crypt. It wasn't grand, just a small bronze disc, dented, with a tarnished back, and a line of green where the rim was cracked. You'd had it since girlhood. Not for vanity, just to check, to fix, to see. Was that wrong? You think of the girl who married last spring, the joy she felt dressing for her wedding, twisting ribbons into her braids, pinching her cheeks for color. She must have looked at herself, should she not? The line between modesty and erasure is thin, and you begin to wonder if this ban was never about Lent at all. Maybe it was about making the female face less visible, less distinct. The priest now walks among the pews, quoting Saint Bernard. A woman who looks too often at herself leaves no room in her soul for God. You look down and feel something stubborn stir in your chest. Not anger, not rebellion, something quieter, sadness maybe, or memory. Because before they took your mirror, it didn't reflect only skin. It reflected moods, wounds, joy. The soft lines around your mouth that came when your son learned to read. The grey hairs that came when your husband was sick. The mirror was not just vanity, it was a witness. Now all you have is touch, guesswork, the kindness or cruelty of others' eyes. The priest ends his sermon with a warning. He says the temptation to look will return. That vanity waits behind every veil. That Easter will bring joy only if you've denied yourself long enough. You walk home, open your shutters again, let in the grey, and imagine the strange day to come when the sack in the crypt is opened, and the mirrors returned. You wonder, will you recognize the woman staring back, or will she look like someone you used to know? The mirror returns on a quiet Tuesday morning, just 4 days after Easter. You hear the knock, 3 short taps on the wooden frame of your door. When you open it, the steward's son stands there with a canvas sack slung over one shoulder, soot on his fingers from helping reset the charcoal pits in the church crypt. He offers no blessing, no apology, only the bag. Inside, wrapped in a strip of wool, is your bronze mirror. Cold, slightly warped, faintly scratched by something sharp, perhaps another's reflection jostling against your own. You thank him, close the door, and sit in silence. The room smells of lentil broth, and beeswax polish. Outside, spring has begun to announce itself. New leaves pressing against window scenes, geese calling overhead, the faint whiff of something blooming along the gutter's edge. You unwrap the mirror. For a moment, you don't lift it. You just hold it in your lap, the way you might hold a letter you're afraid to read, or the bones of something buried that's now been returned. Then slowly you tilt it toward your face and blink. The image is there, but different than you remember, fuzzed slightly at the edges. A line at the corner of your mouth you hadn't marked before, a shadow under the chin that could be a fold, or just a trick of the morning light. You aren't surprised, but you are unsure. Was this always your face? The first emotion isn't recognition, it's distance, like seeing an old friend after too long, or hearing your name spoken in a language you almost forgot. For 40 days, your face had lived in imagination, in memory. You pictured yourself when tying your veil, when biting your lip, when praying in silence. The face in your head was yours, but it was also cleaner, smoother, a little less tired. This one is real, and it is kind. Not beautiful in any courtly sense, not soft or symmetrical, but it has survived. And in its eyes, something you hadn't expected, quiet courage. You stare longer than you mean to. Elsewhere in town, others are doing the same. The seamstress down the lane laughs when she sees her reflection again. Her hair, tangled and uneven, is quickly gathered into braids. The baker's wife winces at a scab on her forehead. The priest's apprentice stares so long that she forgets to stir the soup over the fire. No one says much about the ban being lifted, but you feel it. The way the streets brighten again, not just from sun but from color. The way ribbons reappear in the way conversation grows just a bit louder at the market stalls. The mirrors return, not with celebration, but with relief, with the sense that something unspoken has shifted. Not everyone is pleased. A notice outside the parish warns that vanity is quick to return, that reflection can breed pride, that one should look into a mirror only with purpose and with humility. But you know better now. You know the mirror is not the danger. It is the forgetting your own face, your own age, your own quiet story, told line by line. In the days that follow, you polish the mirror with a bit of wool soaked in cider vinegar. You keep it wrapped tucked beneath the linen in your chest. You do not look into it every day, but when you do, you greet your reflection as a witness, not a temptation, because it has seen what you've weathered. 40 days without yourself, and then the return. A return not to vanity, but to visibility, to the subtle miracle of looking, really looking, and saying, yes, that is me, still here. You crouch beside a slow-moving stream. It's mid-autumn and your fingers are stiff from wind, your cloak crusted with dried mud. The stream looks clean, clear, even. It winds gently past the edge of the encampment, dark leaves drifting on its surface like forgotten letters. And yet you hesitate, because you know what happens when you drink from it. You've seen the signs too many times, the dull ache behind the eyes, the loose bowels, the slow fever, the way a strong man can turn to a ghost in 3 days flat. You know the names, flux, the bloody flux, camp sickness. You've smelled it intense, watched it carry off men faster than arrows ever could. So you dip your hands, but you don't drink. You look back toward the fire pits. There are no pots hanging there, no steam curling into the air, no line of soldiers warming their hands over a shared kettle. Because in this army, like in most of Europe's armies in the 14th and 15th centuries, boiling water isn't routine, not yet. And that omission, that quiet absence of heat, it's costing lives. The truth is hard to swallow. For centuries, most European armies marched and camped without boiling their water. Fires were precious, fuel was scarce, and the knowledge of why boiling helped hadn't yet settled into daily survival. Tea had not arrived, and so you do what soldiers have done for generations. You fill a wooden flask with cold stream water, and add a few crushed mint leaves. Maybe it tastes cleaner, maybe not. You say a brief prayer to Saint Sebastian and take a cautious sip. The man beside you doesn't hesitate. He drinks deep, then wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. He says he's fine. By dusk he's shivering, and by morning he's gone. In camp, the sickness is always there, even if invisible. The latrine trenches overflow, the cooking pots are wiped with cloth, but never scrubbed. Ale spoiled, bread molds, rain seeps into every pouch, pouch seeps into every wound, and still water is taken cold. The Romans boiled, the Greeks steeped herbs, the Byzantines infused mulled wine. But here in your army, in your generation, water is simply water. It's assumed to be clean if it runs, if it's clear, if the animals drink it too. You've never heard of microbes. You know nothing of bacteria. Germ theory is centuries away. You only know what your stomach tells you hours too late. There are whispers of better methods. Some speak of Arab armies who boil their water before every march, of Chinese generals who send scouts ahead not to find high ground but fuel for fires. You've even heard of a strange drink, cha, they call it in the East. It's bitter, green, clean. They drink it daily, ritualistically, not for taste, for survival. But here, in this cold forest, there is no cha, there is only risk. You dream of hot water at night, not for bathing, for drinking, for trusting, for sipping slowly, watching steam curl toward the stars, knowing it will not betray you. But when you wake, there's only the flask. Cold, dubious, and necessary. The enemy may be over the next hill, but the true danger, it's already in your gut. And you wonder, how many more men must die before someone begins to boil? The year is 1610, and you are aboard a Dutch East India Company vessel. The hold is packed with crates, textiles, spices, porcelain, but tucked into the cargo is something still unfamiliar to your world. Boxes of brittle green leaves, carefully wrapped in silk paper. They smell sharp, faintly herbal, not sweet, not fragrant, just clean. The manifest lists them as the tea. At port in Java, the Chinese traders called it cha. The Japanese called it oka. The locals explained how they drank it steeped in water that had been boiled, always boiled, not for taste, for health. And now, this strange leaf has entered the bloodstream of empire. It won't happen quickly. When the tea first arrives in the Low Countries, it's treated as an exotic novelty. Rich women sip it from porcelain cups at salons. Apothecaries experiment with it as a cure for nervous fever. Clergymen denounce it as indulgent, if not outright suspicious. But something changes not in parlours but in camps, because wherever this new leaf appears, so too does something more important, the ritual of boiling. The Dutch Navy begins issuing tea to its sailors, not for pleasure, but for preservation. Water taken from barrels often turned foul on long voyages, but boiled tea made it drinkable, familiar, digestible. Sailors who drank it were less likely to suffer the flux. They stayed alert, they sweated, but did not die. By the late 1600s, the British catch on. At first, tea is confined to officers, but slowly through trade routes stretching from Canton to Calcutta to Portsmouth, it filters into wider circulation, not just the leaf but the habit. The boiling, the discipline. Military doctors begin to notice patterns. Men who drink hot liquids get sick less often, camp latrines stay fuller, but hospital tents stay emptier, and soon the East India Company begins supplying its outposts, not only with muskets and gunpowder, but with kettles. It's not romantic, it's not even cultural, it's logistical. Tea becomes hydration strategy. You see it happen in slow motion. A British officer in Madras insists his regiment receive a tea ration each morning, citing field readiness. A Dutch captain demands portable stoves for his outpost in Ceylon, just so his troops can steep properly. A Prussian officer watches his troops boil coffee grounds, and mutters that tea would be cleaner. And all across Asia, European troops begin mimicking what locals have done for centuries. They boil water, pour it over leaves, and drink without dying. The Chinese, of course, have long known this. The Chajing, a tea manual from the Tang dynasty, 8th century, speaks of the water's spirit, the leaf's virtue, the correct vessel for steeping. But at its heart, it's always been practical. Safe water, clean nourishment, a daily pause. For European armies, it's nothing short of quiet revolution. Hot water is no longer rare, it becomes standard. In the 18th century, British military engineers begin designing mobile field kettles, large copper vessels on wheels, trundled alongside cannons. Fires are lit, leaves are steep, morale is maintained. By the Napoleonic Wars, entire divisions receive morning tea before marching. Letters from soldiers speak not of glory, but of steam. "We were given our cups this morning," one writes, "and I felt I could walk twice as far." It's not about caffeine, it's about trust. In a world where water can kill, tea offers proof that the cup is safe. The boil becomes ritual, the steam becomes comfort, and the empire learns that warmth is strength. It takes over 300 years for this idea to fully take hold, but when it does, it redefines logistics. Not just what soldiers carry, but how they live. Tea teaches the army what doctors could not, that survival begins not in medicine, but in the kettle. The dawn is pale and wet. Your boots sink slightly into the mud. As you stand in formation, musket slung, eyes bleary. Around you, the murmurs are low. Not complaints, not curses, just the clink of tin cups and the faint hiss of steam. It's 1812, and you are with the British Army. Your regiment is preparing to march, but not before tea. It is no longer a luxury, it is policy. The kettle is as essential as the map, a copper monster, dented and blackened, perched on a bed of red coals near the edge of the makeshift camp. A soldier from the quartermaster's team ladles the steaming water into mugs, into pots, into anything that can hold heat. You've been issued your ration: black leaves, coarse and strong, wrapped in parchment. No milk, of course, no sugar, unless you've bought it for it. But the taste matters less than the act. Because this moment, this simple pause, this hot cup in your cold hands, is no longer optional. It is standard operating procedure, and it began not in a general's tent, but in the trenches of survival. Soldiers who drank boiled water lived longer. They marched further. They stayed upright longer under stress. No one had to understand microbes to notice this. The evidence was everywhere. The army adjusted. In fact, they wrote it down. British military handbooks from the late 18th century began to include orders for tea preparation, how to light field stoves quickly, how much fuel was needed to boil a day's supply for a company, how to safely clean the kettle between uses. Morning tea bakes synonymous with readiness, and more than that, with discipline. Commanders noticed something strange. When troops were given a structured, familiar ritual, something as simple as a steaming mug at sunrise, they behaved better, fought harder, complained less. It wasn't just nutrition, it was structure, stability, morale. Tea replaced ale in many rations, replaced brandy in others. The warm liquid dulled hunger, settled nerves, softened cold. One general wrote in his campaign journal, "I have witnessed the fall of strongholds, but no victory more decisive than that of the kettle over the bottle." Across the Channel, Napoleon's forces clung to wine and coffee, but struggled with boiling. Fires drew smoke. Smoke drew bullets. The British, with their collapsible kettles and ritualized camps, kept boiling, even under pressure. It was quiet, but effective. By the Crimean War, army doctors were conducting experiments, comparing sickness rates between boiled water units and cold water ones. The results were impossible to ignore. The tea units survived longer, By World War One, trench soldiers boiled their own water in shell casings. By World War Two, British tanks came fitted with boiling vessels, so tea could be made mid-combat. Entire engineering departments were formed just to refine water purification, kettle design, and ration packaging. And all of it came from a once exotic leaf and a decision to boil. The quiet steam of survival drifting above the fields of Europe. Back in camp, you finish your cup. It's bitter, slightly metallic, but hot and trusted. You rinse the tin, pack your kit, shoulder your musket, and begin the march. Step by step, breath by breath, each man with warmth in his gut, each boot crunching frost. And behind you the kettle cools, but it will boil again tomorrow. Because war is chaos. But tea is order. The tide is out, and the moon is rising. Its pale light lays itself across the shallows like a sheet of cold tin. The boats are moored, nets coiled, oars stacked. Not a man steps into the surf. The town is quiet, save for the occasional bark of a hungry dog and the flap of a broken shutter. No one goes fishing tonight, and it's not the weather, it's the moon. You live in a small coastal village in Brittany in the year of our Lord 1373. The sea has been your town's lifeblood for generations. It has taken husbands, fed orphans, swallowed carts of salt, returned barrels of rotted fish. The sea is your trade, but also your tyrant. And tonight, it wears silver. That's why the boats stay grounded. The moonlight, your grandfather once said, is too sharp. It slices the top of the water like a blade, wakes things that should sleep. Fish dive deeper, nets tangle, the dead stir beneath the surface. You were 6 when you first heard the rule, never fish on a full moon. At first you thought it was a curfew, like don't run near the forge, or never touch the tax collector's cart. But the older you grew, the more serious it became. You remember old Alan, the only one foolhardy enough to challenge it. He took his skiff out on a night just like this, laughing in the moonlight, boasting that fish sparkle better when you can see them. He came back in silence, eyes hollow, mouth closed. He never fished again. No one ever said what he saw. The fear is hard to explain to outsiders. There's no scripture for it, no carved stone, just warnings passed mouth to mouth like salt and prayer. Stories of fish with human eyes, of sudden waves rising under silver skies, of boats found drifting with no oars, only the impression of wet footprints inside. Moonlight, you are told, is the sea's mirror. And mirrors show more than just yourself. Some say the dead of the sea, drowned sailors, shipwrecked merchants, widowed souls, float closer to the surface under the full moon, drawn up like weeds in moonlit tide. Not ghosts exactly, just watchers, hungry, curious. So the superstition builds. Full moons cause accidents, sinkings, strange catches, rotting nets, and the rules follow. No fishing under a full moon, and never ever look straight into the water when the moon is overhead. Even the church, usually stern about superstition, does not correct you. Your priest never fishes. He blesses the boats by daylight and says nothing of the night. Tonight you stand by the dunes, watching the breakers shiver under the silver glow. You feel the pull, the old ache to cast, to work, to fill your hands with something real. But you do not move. The village sleeps early on these nights, doors barred, lamps snuffed, bread saved for morning. And all along the beach, boats sit still, silent, anchored, as if holding their breath. Because in this village, fish are not the only things caught in nets. So are stories, and warnings, and the quiet weight of the moon. The moon has always ruled the sea. That much everyone agrees on. Even the monks in the scriptorium, who labour over maps and saints' lives, whisper about it. They chart lunar phases in their margins, not just for tide calculations, but for omens. Not every moon is the same. Not every shine is safe. A blood moon, they say, foretells war at sea. A blue moon, storms without clouds. And the full moon, the most beautiful of them all, carries the weight of 1,000 drowned whispers. In your village, these beliefs are not written, they are lived. Each time the moon swells to fullness, you see the changes. The boats are double tethered, children forbidden near the tide. Even the fishmongers wrap their wares in extra cloth, as if the gleam of scales might reflect something unwanted. And it's not just here. From Cornwall to the Calabrian coast, similar stories surface. Fishermen vanishing on clear nights. Boats found swamped, though the seas were still. Survivors, rare as they are, speak of strange things. Nets pulled impossibly taut, only to rise empty. Unfamiliar songs carried over the water. A pressure in the chest, as if the sea itself were watching. You recall a tale told by an old sailor who once drifted into port, half-starved. He claimed to have seen a silver fish, the size of a man, swimming just below the boat during a full moon. It blinked, he swore, and the water turned bitter. He never set sail again, spent his final years sweeping the chapel steps. There are dozens of tales like that, the Selkies of the North Sea, who slip their skins to walk ashore on moonlit nights. The Merrows of Irish legend, whose caps drag men into deep dreams. The Savans of the Mediterranean, who rise only when the water shines like polished stone. And then there's the quietest fear, the one no one speaks above a whisper, that the moon in its full light remembers every death by drowning, every whispered name called into the wind, every soul not laid to rest. The water forgets nothing, and on certain nights neither does the moon. Of course not everyone believes. New merchants laugh at the rules. Young men, bold with ale, sometimes row out just to prove a point. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they do not. And when they don't, the village doesn't search, doesn't row. They say a prayer. They tighten their windows. And they wait for the moon to wane. Even local shipwrights build differently. Because of the law, planks soaked longer, keels shaped lower. Certain woods, birch in particular, are never used. Birch burns clean, they say, and clean fire calls clean spirits. The law reaches every part of life. When you mend nets, you use only twine that has not passed through light. When you dry fish, you cover it during the full moon, lest it sour. And when a new boat is blessed, it is always done on a dark moon, never a bright one. Some say it's foolish, but in a world where everything depends on the sea, what choice is there but caution? Better to stay ashore, better to miss a cat, better to lose a day, than be pulled into something deeper than water. You think of your grandfather again, how he told you never to look too long at the moon's reflection on the waves. It's not light you see, he said, it's memory, and memory pulls. You didn't understand then, now you're not so sure. Tonight, the moon floats like a silver coin in the black, perfect, silent, powerful. And somewhere out there, past the reach of your firelight, something moves in rhythm with it. Not wind, not wave. Something older. And you, like every fisherman for centuries, turn your eyes down and wait for the moon to pass. It was the strangest day you ever lived through. It began like any other, dim grey sky, gulls circling the old church spire, damp air clinging to every surface. But something felt off, a heaviness, a slowness in the air. You noticed it first when you reached the harbour and found the boat sitting too still. The water hadn't moved. The tide, which usually tugged at the moorings and lapped lazily against the rocks, was still as glass. You bent down, half expecting to hear the faint slosh beneath the boards. There was nothing. No suction of seaweed, no burble of brine through crevice and gap, just silence. The others noticed too, fishermen, coopers, boys sent to collect driftwood, all pausing, staring. Someone tapped the water with an oar. It made ripples, but no return wave, as if the sea were holding its breath. And then someone whispered, "Where's the moon?" You looked up. Clouds moved slowly, thick and yellow-grey, like stretched wool. The sun should have been climbing. The moon should have been gone, but neither were there. Only dim light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. By noon the entire town was inside, not out of fear, not yet, out of instinct. The harbour master locked the dock gates early. The priest cancelled midday mass and knelt in the nave alone. Mothers lit candles in windowless kitchen. Children sat quietly, staring at the floor. No one worked, no one fished. You stayed by your shuttered window watching the sea, and it never moved. Not forward, not back. It just existed, as if time itself had gone silent. You could see rocks that were normally hidden during high tide, and mud flats that only revealed themselves when the water retreated. But both remained visible at once, caught in an impossible pause. The oldest men said they'd never seen such a thing. They didn't speculate. They just smoked in silence, the way old men do when the past walks too close. By evening the sea still hadn't shifted. Fires were lit, doors were locked. Every dog in the village howled once, then fell silent. The air grew thicker, the kind of pressure that settles behind your eyes before a storm, but with no wind, no thunder, just wait. And then the dreams began. Some swore they heard music low like whale song, but pulsing. Others saw strange reflections in the basin water. One girl claimed to see her dead brother on the sand, waving slowly as if underwater. You didn't sleep at all. You just listened to the silence, to the not sea. At dawn the tide returned, sudden, rushed, almost apologetic. Water flowed again, seaweed down. The old pool resumed, dragging the boats back into their gentle rocking. Birds returned, the wind returned, and the sky at last showed a pale sliver of moon in the west, waning. No one mentioned it aloud. No proclamation, no sermon, just a mutual agreement to pretend it hadn't happened. That day, every single boat remained on shore, even though the weather was good, even though the catch would have been strong, even though nothing had actually happened, except something had. No one ever wrote it down, not in church records, not in ship log, but in the years that followed, a quiet change settled over the town. The boats were painted darker, nets were mended more often, with tighter knots, and the rule about the moon, that ancient whispered superstition, was no longer just for fishermen. It was for everyone, because the moon did something no storm ever had. It stopped being predictable, and in a world built on tides, rhythms, and the comfort of recurrence, that was enough. Now, years later, you still fish, but when the moon grows full and white and silent, you stay ashore, you bar the window, you light a lamp, and if the tide is late again, you wait, you listen, and you do not look directly at the water, because it looked back once, and that was enough. You walk past his bakery every morning. It's quiet. No shouting, no banter with customers, no singing from the back room, no thump of spoons on the side of dough troughs. Just the steady rhythm of a wooden peel sliding across stone, and the gentle hiss of rising loaves. He doesn't speak. He hasn't in years. They call him Lambard the Silent, or sometimes Lambard the Tongueless, though that isn't quite accurate. His tongue is still there, scarred, immobile, pink as a burn, but the taste, gone. No salt, no sweetness, no sour, just heat, just texture, just memory. You were a child when you heard the story, how Lambard, once a soldier, lost his taste after an injury at sea, some say from boiling pitch, others from illness. Either way, the baker who returned was different from the one who left. And yet he baked. At first it was chaos. His early bread came out wrong. Loaves too dry, too bitter, too bland. He couldn't tell the difference between barley and millet by taste anymore. He relied on touch, smell, time. Some say he cried the first time he mistook ash for rye flour. But he didn't stop. Instead he watched how others chewed, how their faces changed after the first bite, how quickly they swallowed, whether they reached for salt or didn't. He kept a slate board in the shop and asked for marks. 1 scratch too flat, 2 too bitter, 3 perfect. At first people mocked it, but then something shifted. The bread improved. Subtle things began to appear. Loaves shaped to hold moisture longer, crusts with tiny fissures that flaked like pastry. Spices used sparingly, but placed precisely, so the scent hit the nose before the tongue ever tasted it. Lombard, the man who could not taste, became the most attentive baker in town, and over time, something strange happened. People started noticing how they ate. The way a crust cracked, the dampness of the crumb, the chew of spelt versus the fluff of wheat. What had once been automatic became intentional. He didn't just teach people to enjoy bread, he taught them to notice it. And quietly, word spread. Lords sent servants to fetch the silent loaves. Monks copied his ratios into their kitchen manuscript. He even caught the eye of a physician from Paris, who insisted that bread made without tasting must be healthier, purer of humours, he said, less affected by gluttony. Lombard never confirmed or denied. He just baked, day after day, year after year. You remember the first time you tasted one of his loaves? Oat honey bread, slightly dense, crust soft. The sweetness arrived not at first, but on the second bite, like a memory. You didn't even realize you were chewing slowly until you were halfway done. That's the magic. The taste creeps in like a whisper, not because it's bold, but because it's careful. Today Lombard is old. His hands are knotted, and his walk is slow, but his oven still burns. He still turns the loaves himself, still writes marks on the slate, still never speaks. He doesn't have to. His bread does. And in a town where most recipes were inherited or stolen or guessed, Lombard did something remarkable. He rewrote them, not by taste, but by attention. Lombard's bread began in silence, but it didn't stay there. By the time you were grown, his influence had already crept into kitchens far beyond the bakery walls. Not just in loaves, but in spoons, in habits, in how people learned to cook, because Lombard, the man who could not taste, had changed what tasting meant. Once, in a typical medieval household, cooking was done by repetition. Recipes weren't written. They were passed down by feel, by mouth, by muscle memory. A stew was made the way your mother made it, with rough scoops and blind trust. No measurements, no correction, just inherited rhythm. If something tasted wrong, it was fixed with more salt, or more ale, or more silence. But after Lombard, that began to shift. He started it quietly. He published nothing. But every loaf that left his bakery came with one small slip of parchment blank. Save for 3 lines. Was it right the first time? What changed on the second bite? What do you want next time? At first, people ignored the questions. Then they answered. Then they began asking themselves the same questions at home. You saw it happen in your neighbor's kitchen, where she measured cinnamon, not by sight, but by counting 3 pinches. Or in the tavern, where the cook labeled barrels by flavor profile, sour but bright, flat, deep. Or at the convent, where a young nun asked the abbess if she might rewrite the bread instructions so that the crust would not harden before the inside was done. That was new. Lombard had, without knowing it, introduced a 4th step into every recipe: reflection. Not instinct, not habit, not taste, but evaluation. And this, in the Middle Ages, was radical, because food was survival. Scarce, often spoiled, often hidden under spices, or boiled into submission. Taste wasn't pleasure. It was a checkpoint, a reassurance that it wouldn't sicken you. But Lambard's bread demanded more. It asked not is it edible, but is it honest? He began teaching quietly, mostly by gesture, by invitation. Bakers from nearby towns came and stayed a day or two, watching how he worked, how he weighed flour not with a scale but with his knuckles, how he timed fermentation by the way the dough sounded when slapped. He told them on slate, "Don't ask if it's good, ask if it's clear." The phrase stuck. You heard it once in Bruges, then again in Rouen. Is it clear? Meaning, is the intention there? Is the taste stable? Not surprising. Does it match what it promises? Eventually, Lambard's method made its way into the kitchens of the minor nobility. A steward in Normandy adapted his questions into a training guide for new cooks. Observe, ask, adjust. In Flanders, a grain merchant funded a pamphlet, Loaves for the Blind Tongue, that advised bakers to taste less and think more. And somewhere along the way, something beautiful happened. Home cooks began trusting themselves, not by instinct, but by observation. They began noting texture, steam, weight, the smell of flour after rising, the shade of crust after cooling. They didn't just follow their mothers. They started becoming bakers of their own judgment. Some said this was the beginning of written recipes, as we know them, not just a handful of this, or a good pinch, but sequences, evaluations, adjustments. And none of it came from a tongue. It came from the man who lost his taste and learned to listen hard. It happened on an ordinary morning. The shutters were still closed, the oven still warm from the night's banking fire. A few sparrows chirped outside the bakery, pecking at scattered grains. You were the one who found him, seated on the worn stool beside the hearth, his hands resting lightly on his lap, head bowed as though he were reading the rise of a loaf that was no longer there. He had passed quietly, like steam from crust. There was no parchment note, no last instructions, no farewell loaf stamped with some secret symbol. Just Lambard, peaceful in his seat, surrounded by the gentle warmth of the bakery he had built, watching over his final batch. Word spread slowly at first, then all at once, by noon, the alley was crowded. Neighbors, bakers, children, even old priests and weary tavern cooks, who rarely left their kitchens. They came not to mourn, exactly, but to witness, to pay tribute, not with flowers or bells, but with bread. Every person brought a loaf, not fancy ones, not sweet or rare, just what they made, the bread of their homes, of their hands, of their learning. And they laid them, one by one, in a circle around the oven. Some bore rosemary, some smelled of ash, some were dry, some raw in the middle. One was little more than hard crust and intention, but it didn't matter, because every loaf was trying, and that was Lambard's legacy. He didn't teach people to bake like him. He taught them to pay attention to what they were already doing. In the days that followed, a few of the town's guild members offered to take over the shop. One even suggested turning it into a school. But in the end, the door stayed closed for a time. The oven cooled, the flour sacks emptied, the silence returned, and you missed it, not just the bread, but the way it made people behave, the waiting, the notice, the conversations over texture and patience. Weeks later, you walked past the bakery and noticed someone had left something at the door. A small slip of parchment, weighted by a crusty heel of bread. On the parchment, 3 questions, Lambard's old ones, written in careful, uncertain hand. Was it right the first time? Because what changed on the second bite? What do you want next time? You smiled, took the heel, ate it slowly. It was dry, but earnest, and you wrote your answers on the back. In time, others did too. They say the bakery eventually reopened, not as a shop, but as a hearth for learning, for silence, for quiet heat, a place where taste was not assumed, but discovered, not demanded, but earned. There were no signs, no menus, no prices, only bread, and every loaf bore one mark, scored softly into the dough. A single question mark, not to confuse, but to invite. To this day, bakers across the land speak of Lombard, not as a master, but as a mirror, a man who could not taste, but who taught everyone else how to pay attention to what was already in their mouths. He left no book, no heirs, just loaves and a question.